to Lex Reads. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about everything Harlem Renaissance. This is one of my favorite genres in literature. I absolutely adore the Harlem Renaissance. Always knew about the Harlem Renaissance, but I never had just really dig deep and read the literature from that time. And when I started reading that literature, I was dumbfounded because it reads so modern. Also, the stories are like no other. There's no stories like the stories during the Harlem Renaissance. Those authors did not come to play. They honestly did not. If you want a well-rounded, entertaining, memorable story, you need to read some books from the Harlem Renaissance. So in this video, this is basically a guide, okay? If you never read Harlem Renaissance, if you don't know where to start, if you just want to learn about it, this video is for you. So before we get started, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So like I told you guys, Harlem Renaissance is one of my favorite times during literature. I really was inspired to do this video because if you guys don't know, this week coming up on the 4th of February, which is a Tuesday, Victoria Christopher Murphy is releasing a book called Harlem Rhapsody. It is about the real life author during that time, Jessie Redmond Fauset. And if you guys have, watched my channel, if you guys have been here for a while, you guys know that I always say I have two favorite authors during that time. First is Jessie Redmond Fauset. Second is Wallace Thurman. Jessie Redmond Fauset, oh my gosh, y'all. That's beyond a goat, okay? I notice a lot of people, every time they talk about the Harlem Renaissance, they always mention Langston Hughes and they mention Hughes and Hurston, which those are goats, okay? First of all, you have to mention them. Those authors are fantastic. They contributed to not only just this time in history, but in literature in general. But if it was not for Jessie Redmond Fauset, a lot of the authors from the Harlem Renaissance we would not know. For example, Langston Hughes, she's the first one that published his works. So we wouldn't know him if it wasn't for her. Now, I'm also going to be honest. A lot of the tea that people are talking about from, Victoria's new book, it ain't tea over here. Again, if you guys have watched my channel in the past, when I talk about Harlem Renaissance books and authors, which I'll put those videos down below, I already told you the tea about her affair with W. Du Bois. That ain't nothing new. Okay, that ain't nothing new. I think people are shocked because of that. People now, if you don't know a lot about the Harlem Renaissance, if you haven't dig and excavated, of course that'll be a shock. I mean, it still is a shock because W. Du Bois, that's like Black excellence, and you find out that he was messing around with a lot of other people. It makes you feel some type of way. But yeah, that ain't no tea. I'm very curious to see how she is going to depict her life. So for the Harlem Renaissance, it started back in 1918 through the mid 1930s. First, it was called the New Negro, but then they translated it to the Harlem Renaissance. James Weldon Johnson, who was an author, also he's a composer. He is the co-writer of Lift Every Voice and Sing. He called it the flowering of Negro literature. And so the first author that I did want to mention, they call him the forerunner of the Harlem Renaissance. He was a poet. He published his first volume of poetry in 1913. It was called A Little Dreamer. His name was Flint Johnson. Have this collection. It's called Song of Soil. Now, he was based in Chicago. They do call him the forerunner of the Harlem Renaissance. So next, if you want to read like the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, I would say you have to start with this anthology. And it's by Eileen Locke. It's called The New Negro. Again, like I told you guys, this is what it was first coined. And I actually have two copies of this. I wanted like two editions. Now, this came out in 1925, edited by Eileen Locke. Just like Jessie Redmond Fauset, he is also a key part to the Harlem Renaissance. They called him the Dean of the Harlem Renaissance because he put this collection together to showcase, Black literature, Black art, Black music, all of that. The Harlem Renaissance, it really was a time where Blacks, they were able to express themselves through art, through music, through literature, through film, and he played a major part when it came to the literature aspect of it. In this collection, it has authors like Rudolph Fisher, it has Jean Toomer, Hughes and Hurston, Richard Bruce Nugent, Eric Walden, Claude McKay, Langston Hughes. You have Ann Spencer, Claude McKay, Calty Cullens. So if you really want to get into Harlem Renaissance and don't know where to start, I would say start with this. This is an anthology. I always say with any literature, if you don't know where to start, Anthologies are really good. Next, we're going to talk about some underrated authors from the Harlem Renaissance. Because like I said before, a lot of times when people mention the Harlem Renaissance, they mainly say Zora Neale Hurston, they say Langston Hughes, they'll say Claude McKay. Those are like the main people, especially Langston Hughes and, Zora Neale Hurston. But when I tell you, through my research, there are so many underrated, unknown authors during that time where they just don't get the praise and recognition. So first is a man named Walter Francis White. Walter Francis White, he actually was the, I believe, secretary of the NAACP. I'll put a picture of him. His works during the NAACP, they said sometimes he would disguise himself as a white man, and he would go into like the KKK meetings and see what they was talking about, and would go back and report it, to the NAACP. When you mention his name, they always go back to him working, and him working for the NAACP. But he was an author. And one story that I love of his is called Flight. I love this edition because this cover is just amazing. But they coined this book. They said, Walter White's Flight may be one of the least read important books telling the story of Black migration, urbanization, and segregation. And that is true. This was published in 1926, and from its publication, it did create a little bit of trouble, a little bit of criticism, because they said that he was airing out, the dirty laundry of Black Americans. It's set in the 1900s. And it's about a young girl named Mimi. Mimi is very light complected. She looks white. Set in the South in the beginning, I believe it is New Orleans. And she grew up privileged, and she gets caught up in a situation down in Louisiana. And it's just not going well for her. And she says, you know what, I'm going to go to New York. But while she is in New York, it is very difficult for her to make ends meet. I mean, she cannot catch a break. And she says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go pass for white. I look white. I think I can do it. But it's so many consequences that goes along with this. And when you read this book, you will want to just slap Mimi, because it's like, baby, why did you do that? You could have did something else, okay? Another book of his is called The Fire in the Flint. And this is about a young man who he just graduated from medical school. He is a doctor. He is going to open up a practice in the South, but the KKK, they not down with that. The fact that you have a Black doctor that is going to open his own practice, and there's a lot of consequences that come along with this. Okay, this book is not happy. It's not a happy ending. You got to get your mind right with this. I mean, you're dealing with the KKK. You already know it's not going to go well. This was published in 1924. Next is Countee Cullen. Now, Countee Cullen, he was a poet, but he also had one novel that was called One Way to Heaven. And this one will also make you want to fight because it is about a young woman. She is, I believe, heavily in the church. Good girl. She meets a man that is not good, and he just spirals down. They both spiral down, and you see how it goes. Now, some tea on Countee Cullen. A lot of the artists during this time, they were closeted homosexuals, and of course, they could not come out, with it. And he actually got married to W. Du Bois's only daughter, Yolanda. And him and W. Du Bois, they basically constructed the whole, wedding. It was like Yolanda had little to say about, the wedding. And there was like 3,000 people that came to the wedding. The reason why he wanted Yolanda to marry Countee Cullen is because when she was at Fisk University, she was in a little relationship with a jazz musician. And he did not like that. So they was like, you need to marry Countee Cullen. You need to marry him. He's a decent man. I know him. Do that. So she agreed to do it. So after the honeymoon, him and his little friend, they went to, I believe, Paris, like shortly after the honeymoon. About 2 weeks into the relationship, he wrote a letter to Yolanda telling her that he has feelings for a man. She told her dad, and the marriage lasted about two years. Then W. Du Bois proceeded to write to Countee Cullen saying, oh, I thought that the reason why of you guys' divorce is because her lack of sexual experience. No. First of all, you knew that she was involved with a jazz musician. You already knew that jazz musician was probably getting her together, okay? She was learning some stuff. So I'm like, that didn't make sense. No. And also, Yolanda sent the letter to you that he wrote to her saying that he had feelings for men. Well, that just seemed like that was a whole situation that could have been avoided. But overall, he's a very good writer, a very good poet. Another thing by him, he hated that he was number two and Langston was number one. He expressed that to a lot of people. But County, he could write and he can write poetry, but not like Langston Hughes. There's only one Langston Hughes. There's something special about Langston Hughes when it came to his poetry and his writings. And I'm sorry, like I said, I love his writings. I love his literature, but he not bad like Langston Hughes. Next is Jean Toomer Kane. And this came out in 1923. This book, you almost can't like categorize it because it's like a novel. It has short stories. It has poetry. And just so much to this, work of literature. Now with Jean, he didn't like to be known as a black writer. He actually denounced it. He didn't want to be almost associated with, the blacks, which clearly that didn't work for him because, people know him as a black writer. But his thing is he didn't want to be known as that. So yeah. Next is Richard Bruce Nugent. Now Richard Bruce Nugent, he was a writer and he was a painter. This is actually his paintings. And he was the only openly homosexual during that time. He did not care what anyone said about him. And this is his works. This is his full-length novel, Gentleman Jigger. You have a man named Stuart. He lives in Greenwich Village. He becomes involved with a young man that is just like no good, real trifling. But Stuart, he a little conniving because he know that he like oh boy, but then he end up getting involved with this heiress. So he wanted him, man. But when I tell you this was very entertaining. Next is When Washington Was in Vogue by Edward Christopher Williams. This book, I actually have two copies of this book. This was the original cover of the book, so that's why I wanted to get this one. But this book, first of all, it's the first book published by a black person, I believe, that was in letter form. And this book also is different because a lot of the books is set during the Harlem Renaissance is set in New York, it's set in Harlem. This is not. This is set in Washington. And also too, they compare this book to The Great Gatsby because it gives you that vibe, except it's just black. I have a man named Dari. He gets involved with the, high elites, high society in Washington, D.C., and he is living in a rooming house. And I believe he wants to be a writer, very, very smart, and he's writing letters to his friend. But it's this annoying girl named Caroline who he adores. He loves her, but she kind of don't. It gives you the vibe of Gatsby and Daisy a little bit, where she likes this other man and is involved with this other man who is, kind of fast, gets around a little bit, and Darby's real reserved. He does stuff right. But when I tell you Caroline is so annoying, she does stuff like she go in his room when he's not there and, uses his thing, sits on his desk and all that. So he come home and she just there and he like, oh hey, and, he's so smitten by her and loves her so much. Some stuff she did would just annoy you. Also, she is also, I believe, her parents, they own the rooming house, and they just want her to be in society. They want her to find a husband and things like that. This book was actually very funny. It was very witty, and it does, like I said, give you the Great Gatsby, but just with a happier ending, because Great Gatsby don't end happy. This end happily. Okay. Next is a play called Rachel by Angelica Ward Gimsky. So you have a girl named Rachel. Her mother is a widower, has a brother. I also believe she has a daughter. And her mother just can't get down with, their father not being alive anymore. Kind of see the ins and outs of their family, how difficult it can be. She also has some short stories that are really good. Rachel, it's such a great play. It's hard to talk about it without giving it away. Overall, you see a black family dealing with grief, dealing with loss, dealing with segregation, just all of that in one. Next is Bottoms. I know I'm probably saying that wrong. Now, I haven't read any of his literature. I have it. They say that he's known for Black Thunder, which is this book. It says it was originally published in 1936. It's a story of Gabriel, a slave who decided to avenge the murders of a fellow slave by landing the blacks of Richmond against their masters. Even as plans go awry the night of the attack, Gabriel still believes in the triumph of his struggle to lead blacks to freedom. So it's a slave revolt. Okay. Yeah. Sounds interesting. I'm gonna have to get into him this year. Next is Rudolph Fisher. He is known for writing the first detective novel written by an African American. He was a doctor, he was a musician, and he was a writer. But if you like mysteries, I would say get into this because this is actually a Harlem mystery. Next is Tropic Thunder by Eric Waldwin. Now, he was a Caribbean author. This is his only works, I believe. He did short stories and he writes about, his culture. If you are into short stories, want to read something different, I would say read him. I really did enjoy his writing. Okay, so that is it for the unknowns. Next, let's talk about some of my favorites from the Harlem Renaissance. Like I told you guys, my favorite author of the Harlem Renaissance, two of them, is Jessie Redmond Fauset and Wallace Thurman. But I would say like my favorite book of all times during that time is Plum. Y'all, I have, I think, 3 copies of this. Oh my gosh, this is so good. It is so good. And it ends, it's like a fairy tale Cinderella ending. Okay, it's a lot of hardships in the beginning, but the way it ends, and it's like, oh my gosh, how can I explain this, you guys? Okay, so you have 2 sisters, Virginia and Angela. Angela, she looks white. She could pass for white. Her mom also looks white. So the dad and then Virginia, they're brown skin. They're like my color, so they can't pass, right? But Angela's mother, they go on these little dates where they walk around like the white, part of the area, where they go to shops, they try on gloves, they eat pastries, they can do all of that because they look white, right? So during that time, they white. And when they come home, they black. It was one scene where, it was so sad. Her and Angela, they were walking down the street and they pass, literally right past Virginia and the dad. And of course they can't speak to them because, they can't. And the mom is so ashamed. She's like, I literally just passed my own child and act like I didn't know her because, I'm passing for white because I want the privilege of going into shops and not being stopped and things like that. And one thing that this book, it really does hit the nail on the head where they don't hate being black, but it's the inconvenience of being black. The fact where something simple where you cannot go to the shops and try on gloves. You cannot go to, the store and buy, whatever you want to buy. And it's just like, I just want to go into the store, and not be bothered. You know what I mean? And that's as simple as that. And she really does, like I said, hit the nail on the head with this. And so, their parents die. It's not a spoiler. Their parents die. And Angela's like, you know what? I'm sick of this. I'm sick of every time I try to, get ahead, I can't because of my color. And she is a artist. Can draw like nobody's business, right? So she like, I'm going to New York. I'm passing. I don't care what nobody say. Mom and daddy dead. What am I gonna do? You know what I mean? And she told Virginia, look, I'm sorry, but I just gotta go. And she goes and she passes for white. Another hurdle comes along, and it is her gender. And she realizes, oh, okay, so it's not just a racial thing, but also it's a gender thing. So white women, okay, they don't have to deal with the racial aspect, but they have to deal with the gender aspect. And girl, she sees that, and it's a lot of stuff that goes on in this book. Y'all have to read this book. Please read Plum Bun. This book is amazing. It is amazing. I don't know how many times I have highlighted and quoted this book because it is that well read. She has 4 books. I have read, obviously, this, and I have read The China Berry Tree. This is also ahead of its time. It deals with incest. It's not also set in Harlem. I think it's set in Jersey, I believe. She was from Jersey, so a lot of her stories are set in Jersey. There is Confusion. I haven't read this one. One of the critics, it was a white critic, he said, white readers just don't expect Negroes to be like this. And it said by the 1930s, people stopped talking about her other works. It's just like high society blacks that have something, okay? The book of hers, which I have, I don't know where it is. It's called Comedy American Style. Which is another book I do need to read of hers. I just need 2 more books I need to read of hers. Next is Wallace Thurman, and he is known for The Blacker the Berry. He did publish 3. He published 3 books. One of them, The Inferno, I believe that came out that came out after he died, which is out of print. You can't get it. This book, really loved it. This one is different because a lot of the books during the Harlem Renaissance, usually the character is trying to pass for white, and Imogene is very, 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 very dark. They call her almost like a shoe black, and her whole family is very, very light skinned, and she just hates that. She hates the fact that she's so dark, so she goes to California and goes to school, and when I tell you, she just talks so badly about blacks, okay? Just thinks that they're just so down, so horrible, and it's like, girl, you black. But some things happen in her life that is not good. She gets involved with a little trifling man, and you see how it goes. Very, very good story. Loved it. Love every minute of it. I would say my favorite book by his is The Infants of the Spring. This is a book about the Harlem Renaissance. During the Harlem Renaissance, you have these characters that are based on real people. They're based on Langston Hughes or Hurston, Dorothy West, where they are black where they are black artists. They are trying to develop a magazine where they showcase literature, they showcase music, they showcase art, and it's actually based on a real life magazine that was published and that was published and founded by Wallace Thurman. It's called Fire, and it only had 1 edition because, first of all, he went broke by doing this. He didn't have money for it, and then they said the headquarters ended up burning down, and so he was like, well, you know what, I don't have money for this. And the people that were, and some of the authors, they were supposed to contribute some money, and they didn't, so he just became bankrupt. You have Richard Bruce Nugent, you have Wallace Thurman, you have Zora Hurston, you have writings from Arna Bottom, Helen Johnson, Coty Cullen, Langston Hughes, who else? Gwendolyn Bennett. You have Aaron Douglas. He was a painter. He actually did this. It's basically based off of this, and it is so, so, so good. As you can see, I tabbed it to death. I would really recommend this book. This one doesn't get a lot of praise and recognition, but he had a very sad life. He was a very dark-skinned man. He hated that he was dark-skinned. He grew up in Utah, and I believe Langston Hughes called him a poor soul or something like that, because he hated the fact that he was so dark skinned. He died young. He was a heavy drinker. He died of tuberculosis and alcoholism. He always thought that his works were not up to par, and it was like, little do you know that is not true, because his writing is fantastic. One short story that I love by him is called Cruella the Crude. Y'all have to read it. I believe there is I think I'll put it down below if it still is. There is on YouTube a person reading the short story, because it's very, very short. It is about a young girl. She becomes a prostitute almost by accident. Y'all gotta read it. I want to give it away, but it is so good. My favorite author and story that I loved during the Harlem Renaissance is, of course, Passing by Nellie Larsen. I'm so glad that Nellie Larsen finally is getting her recognition, her due. She only has 2 full-length novels. This Quicksand, which is her first book, and then Passing, and then she has some short stories, about 4 short stories. The reason why is she was accused of plagiarism, and she didn't do it. They dismissed the case. They realized that she didn't do it, but she was like, you know what, I'm sick of this. I'm just gonna go back to my first occupation, which was nursing, and that's what she did. They said she isolated herself from the literary community. She didn't write anymore, and that was it. Of course, you can't mention the Harlem Renaissance without talking about the GOATs, which is Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes. Of course, everyone knows Their Eyes Are Watching God. Fantastic. I mean, come on now. You cannot forget Tea Cake. You cannot forget Janie. Fantastic story. Of course, Langston Hughes. He's known for his poetry, but he does have a lot of short stories that are fantastic. He only wrote 1 full-length novel, which was this. Not Without Laughter. I did a read a book in one day, which I'll put down below because this book was amazing. Now, him and Zora, they had a little beef because they were going to do a play, and it was called the Mule Bone, and he said that it was his play, but Zora said no, it's my play, and I don't think she gave him the documents, the writings, so it never came into fruition. And they finally, after they were both deceased, um they some publishers, they put together the play, and it was an off-Broadway play, but because they was beefing, they couldn't get it together. Which I would say, if you want to read his poetry and want like a whole collection, I would recommend you guys get this. This is the complete poems of Langston Hughes, and this is very cheap. This is only $21, which I was so shocked that this was $21. This is all of his collective works of his poetry. I'm not really a fan of poetry. That's not my ministry. I would say he is one of my favorites. Gwendolyn Brooks is one of my favorites, and of course Paul Laurence Dunbar. But poetry, I'm not really into it. But I had to get this. But his short stories are my favorite. I love this collection. It's called The Ways of White Folks. This, y'all have to read this. It is so good. It's a short story, I believe, in either one of these two anthologies. Y'all, this is another one. Just like I said, you guys need the New Negro. You have to get this. If the portable Harlem Renaissance Reader, and this one is the Messenger Reader. I believe that short story is in this one, Young Glory of Him. And this was published in 1927. And it's about a family. They're on a a boat. You have this young sailor. He's real hot to trot, real fast, ladies' man. And the young innocent girl gets involved with him. But he has this thing of, when he gets involved with a woman, of course, the women, they are so head over heels for him, where they give him souvenirs, little things. He wanted a man, and he keeps all of these women's souvenirs. But what he does to that poor little innocent girl, y'all have to read it. It is so good. Wedding Day by Gwendolyn Bennett. You have a young man named Paul. I believe he's a musician. Down on his luck. Can't stand no women. Can't stand nobody. And he ended up getting involved with a white woman who is a prostitute named Mary. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say. Oh, yeah. Y'all have to read the story. It's called Wedding Day by Gwendolyn Bennett. And it's in this collection. Y'all, Mary gets him together, okay? She gets him together. That one kept me on my toes. That's what I want to talk about with you guys is this a play? No, it's a book. It's by Angelica Ward Ginsky. She's the one that I talked about earlier, which is Wedding Day, which is Rachel the play. But this one is it's a book called, it's a short story, sorry. It's called The Closing Door. It was issued in 1919. And it's talking about the Red Summer. I also believe in Rachel, that's also the setting, where it was a racial riot where like a lot of black people got, murdered. You have a woman named Agnes. Agnes's husband is in that race riot. And she is with child. I believe she does have the baby, but she's still in postpartum depression, something like that. And she does some stuff that she has no business doing. Yeah. This one got to get your mind right, but it's really, really good because I did not know anything about the Red Summer. She really does talk about racial injustice, within black communities, everything like of that nature. Dorothy West, she's another author during that time. She was like the last living person during the Harlem Renaissance. I think she died in like the 90s or something like that. She's known for The Wedding and The Living Isn't Easy. The Living Isn't Easy, but The Wedding, that was like written way after the Harlem Renaissance, but she did do some short stories. And then just some honorable mentions. Of course, like I said, Dorothy West, she's one. George Schuler is another one. He wrote Black He wrote Black No More. He also wrote some plays. Claude McKay, of course, you can't forget Claude McKay. He was a poet and also has some full-length novels. I would say one of my favorite poems by his is If We Must Die. Helen Johnson, she is a poet too. Alice Dunbar Nelson, she was the wife of Paul Laurence Dunbar. She also was involved in the Harlem Renaissance. I would say overall, you need to get these. The Portable of Harlem Renaissance, and then you need to get the Messenger Reader, and then also the New Negro. These are like your guides, you guys. Start with these. If you want to get in the Harlem Renaissance, start with these. So yeah, guys, that is it. I mean, I could talk about so many other authors that I have discovered. This is already gonna be a long video. So just wanted to share this with you guys because this is a time in our literature that was just fantastic. I mean, there's no time like the Harlem Renaissance. And I would urge you guys, if you haven't read the Harlem Renaissance, please read it. Please read during that time. If you have, read more because these stories are just one of a kind. So yeah, guys, that's all I have for you. And I'll be back with more Black Books. Bye.